People who had a life situation where they were planning on transacting and really needed to get it done, and out of need, are still transacting. Welcome to our video this week. I'm insanely excited to do this one for you. I've spent so many hours. I've spent a lot of hours late at night, early in the morning, just trying to study the market, get a lot of relevant statistics, see what's going on out there. There's so much noise. So I'm excited to go out and go very deep into this video and talk about the market pre-coronavirus, talk about the market, what's going on now during the coronavirus, and then what I believe is going to be happening after the coronavirus. I'm going to do my best job to go in and give you the best data that's out there in terms of what's going on here. And if you guys have any questions at all, feel free to let me know. But I'm going to dive right into it and talk about what's going on pre-coronavirus. We had anticipated that appreciation was going to be about 7%. That was a statistic done by Zillow. They follow the trend. Zillow actually does a very good job in terms of macro trends. In terms of how much each home is worth, their valuations are pretty off. But in terms of on a macro basis, they tend to be pretty spot on. So that was what they were anticipating, 7%. 4% historically is a normal market. Just on average, it goes about 4% year over year. What they had, and a big contributor to that is that we're going to have a low inventory and a very strong seller's market. And then what was going on is just there was very low signs of slowdown. Unemployment was very low. Just in general, things were going very well in the economy until the coronavirus took place. And I don't need to go in too deep of what's going on with the coronavirus. You guys all have the news and TV and social media. I'm sure you've been bombarded with what's going on there. But as we know, the stock market took a big hit, and everyone started asking me, well, is real estate going to follow suit? What's going on here? And I'm just going to talk about what's going on right now, and then we'll go a little deeper into what's going on afterwards. So the first statistic that I want to bring up is the low inventory. Both buyers and sellers are kind of taking a break. We're seeing that in the amount of active listings. In 2019, there were right around 8,500 active listings during this time, right? In 2020, it's been closer to 7,000. And then we recently peaked on this graph. You'll see that there at about 7,700. Both years, when we're talking about under contract, both years have stayed close to about 7,000. This year, we actually, during this same time last year, we actually had 500 more under contract than this last year, or than 2019. So what that means is there's 500 more people with a lower amount of inventory. There's 500 more people who have decided to agree to purchase this home, right? And now we get into the off market. Off market, essentially what that means is these folks have said for whatever reason, hey, I want to put my home on the market, and then they say, oh, hey, we want to pull off the market. We want to wait for whatever reason, right? There's a million reasons why that could happen. But the gap was about 300, right? So there's about 300 more right now compared to last year that have pulled their homes off the market as kind of a waiting period. I've seen that a few times, probably 2 or 3 different sellers that I was working with the buyer. They decided to just pull off the market even though we gave them an offer, and they said, hey, whatever reason we want to pull out, we want to wait for a little bit and see how things play out. So because there's some uncertainty there, some of the sellers have decided to pull their homes off the market, which makes the inventory even lower. And then a big factor to look at what's going on right now, right? So we're looking at backlog data from the whole month of March, and that's really when the corona started taking off, right? So a lot of those deals just kind of finished there. And then an important thing is to look at is what are the trends that we see going up. Showing time is a showing service that we use here in the real estate industry that essentially you can click a couple buttons and say, hey, I want to look at this home, and it's processed through them, and then the seller gets a notification, and that's how you schedule showing. So a lot of times we use this program called Showing Time. What Showing Time has shown was the amount of showings in April took a big sharp nosedive compared to what it was, right? On the graph, you're going to see it as typically during this time, winter is a little slower and spring starts to ramp up. And this time we actually ramped down, right? So all the other years you'd see it ramp up. This time we ramped down. It was pretty sharp until recently, just a couple days ago, we started to see that ramp back up pretty sharply again, right? So people are still out there looking at homes. I think for a couple of weeks, folks were just saying, oh, like, we're afraid that this next recession is going to be as bad as 2008 or the Great Depression or something like that. That was the big fear of what was going to happen. So because of that, a lot of folks were saying, hey, I want to hold off. But I think a general sentiment that we're seeing is the people who are wanting to transact just for convenience, just like, oh yeah, I wanted to move for whatever reason, they're just out of the game right now. But the people who are like, hey, I had to move for a job, where we've been living, we now have 5 kids living in a 1-bedroom, right, and we need to upgrade, whatever is going on, people who had a life situation where they were planning on transacting and really needed to get it done, and out of need, are still transacting, right? But the people who are just kind of conveniently buying or conveniently selling have kind of left the market, right? As we look at market stats, we're looking at the average days on market for March, right? March was actually kind of crazy, right? Our days on market dropped from 28 from 2019 to 2020. It went down to 20, right? So it was 28 days on market for 2019 and 20 for 2020. So many 20s, I'm kind of losing it. And then the median sold price actually jumped quite a bit. It was, pretty close to Zillow's 7-8%. Not 7 or 8%. It jumped up almost 11-12%. Median sold price was 305 from last March, and this March it was 340. So that's a crazy high amount of appreciation. A portion of that is the amount of new homes being built was what's taking place there as well. And then we look at homes sold is practically the same. It went down like 1.4%. Single family homes went down a little bit, about 2.7%. Multifamily went up 2.9%, right? And then as we're looking at just the overall inventory, one more time to go over that, as you can see it all in this one graph, is active listings from right now were really low, right? It's about 6,500, right? And then under contracts was even higher. It was 7,200. And then last year was 8,300, and 6,400 were the amount that were under contract. I know this is a lot of data as we're going super deep into this. Overall, what's going on in the coronavirus is that people who need to transact right now are transacting, right? They're pushing past that. It's not a big enough deterrent for them to do it. And because we had such low inventory, we're seeing buyers go in and do that, right? And sometimes people are still getting 2 or 3 or 4 offers on their home. But if nothing would have happened with the coronavirus, maybe we would have seen 7 or 8 offers on that same home. So that's kind of what's been going on right now, in the little State of the Union. And now the big thing that all of us want to know is what's going to be happening afterwards. And I'm going to go in real deep right now on statistics and just go graph after graph, and we're going to nail those down super hard on the differences of what was going on right now as opposed to what was going on in 2008. So we're going to jump in, and again, we're going to hammer that out super hard. Great. To get started, we're going to go in super deep on home appreciation. Home appreciation the 6 years prior to the Great Recession were on average close to about 9%, which was like 8.6, 6.5, 8.5, 8.75, 12.5, 11.4, and that's just unsustainable, right? And what's been going on nationwide just in general in terms of appreciation is about 4.4, 5.2, 5.5, 6.4, 4.8. So it's closer to about 5%. So it's a little bit above a healthy market. Utah, we've actually been doing higher than that. We've been closer to 6-7%. But we have a lot of things to justify that in terms of growth going on in Utah. A lot of other states don't have that. So to compare, it's a justifiable appreciation. So that's a very big thing to notice, is the appreciation was just going absolutely rampant, and people were buying things on purely speculation. And a big reason for that is this next graph that we're looking at is the historic data for mortgage availability, right? So in general, the higher it is on the graph, the easier it is to get a mortgage, right? So it was way, way, way easier to get a mortgage back then than what it is now. Now it's become much, much more strict, and it's become more strict for quite a while. I mean, right after 2008, it became very strict, and we haven't changed that standard too much. So essentially, to get a mortgage, you actually have to be qualified, which is honestly a good thing, and it keeps the market nice and strong, right? And that's the index that we're looking at for the mortgage credit index. The next item that we're looking at is in terms of inventory. In 2008, 6, 7, 8, the inventory was incredibly high, right? But people were still buying things on speculation. Everything was the wild, wild west. But right now, back then that was an insane buyer's market. Right now, we're in a very, very good seller's market. So that keeps the house prices much more stable. And then the next thing that we're looking at is equity, the amount of equity that was going on in people's homes. Back then, people were taking their equity, and it was absolutely insane, right? You could do, your loan to value ratio could be, negative, right? So you could go in and you could have negative equity on your home and then still cash out and get money to do whatever you want, right? So people were just anticipating that this appreciation was going to go on forever and that it was going to be insanely good forever. And that definitely wasn't the case. There's a lot of things leading up to it that should have been indicators, hey, it's a little scary to be doing it like that. So they were pulling out their equity, and they were buying their jet skis, they were buying their boats, they were buying a lot of things that weren't necessary. So as they were doing that, what takes place is any shift, and you say, oh, well, darn, we don't have any equity in our home, we can't take any shifts, right? And if we go any time without our mortgage payment, we're at negative equity, so I can't even sell the home and recoup any of my money because they have negative equity. Right now, 50%, I'm going to go in a little deeper, 53% of people have more than 50% equity. And 30% are owned free and clear, almost 37% actually, are owned free and clear. That is insane, right? That is a very, very large portion of the population that own homes. They're not taking any of their equity out of their home, right? Equity is supposed to be pulled out. You can use that to start a business, to stimulate the economy by doing things like that. But if it's purely for entertainment, it's purely for things that aren't necessary, then it's very dangerous to do it that way. The next graph we're looking at is the total equity cashed out. So in 2005, it was $263 billion. 2006, $321 billion. 2007, $240 billion. So the 3 years leading up to it, it was $824 billion that was pulled out of equity of people's homes to spend it on a lot of times it was frivolous things. So this is the last 3 years, right? 2017, it's been $71 billion. 2018, it's been $87 billion. 2019 was $74 billion. So those 3 years put together weren't even equaling 1 year of the equity that was being pulled out those 3 years prior to the Great Recession. So to me, what that's saying is we have definitely learned our lesson. We're not pulling that out. A lot of times people are pulling out that equity, doing HELOCs, doing cash out refis like a lot of my clients do to buy more properties. So they're buying more appreciating assets, or they're using it to kickstart their business. That's how equity should be used. So in a very big way, that's how it was being done, and that's the correct way to do it, and that's the correct way to use equity. And again, what we were talking about in terms of inventory, so just so you're aware, in terms of inventory, the months of inventory that were going on in 2007 was about 8.2 months. And right now we're at about 3.1 months. And that's nationwide. In Utah, we're actually lower than that, which is, good and bad. Essentially, that just means we have less homes on the market and we have a very high demand for it. So it means the market stays a little stronger. In this next graph, we're looking at the percent of median income needed to purchase a median priced home. And it was crazy, right? In 2007, home values were up, wages were down, mortgage rates were high, and affordability was very difficult. So it's become a lot easier now, right? The interest rates there were absolutely insane. I mean, we can look at adjustable rate mortgages that were taking place, which are very scary things. I'm glad that they're not common hardly at all right now. The interest rates were very high. People were in the interest rates of 10, 11%. So very, very high interest rates. And all those things, I don't know how more people didn't catch that. It was just very unsustainable to continue doing it that way. And for the consumer, any shift, it would have killed them, right? People were just way over leveraged, and that's when things get very dangerous. So in conclusion, right now is very, very different than it was leading up to the Great Recession. I think we have a much, much higher, much, much stronger market, and we're much better situated to weather a storm, especially here in Utah. We just have so many factors that are working for us that I'm excited to be here, frankly. Now, the next graph I want to look at is one done by JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Wells Fargo. What all these guys are predicting, which these aren't small fish, these guys get paid insanely amounts of money to make sure that their predictions are correct. And if not, there are clients that, I mean, these guys are very big fish, billion-dollar companies. They're going to go in and say, hey, if their projections were wrong, there's a lot riding on that, and people could lose their jobs. People would lose a lot on these investments if these speculations were wrong. But what they're predicting is a sharp V. And essentially what that means is, yes, we are having a very sharp dip in the economy, but what they're projecting is by quarters 3 and quarters 4, we're going to start seeing a very sharp recovery. And if that's the case, then that's honestly very, very good news. What that means is housing technically won't be affected hardly at all. The big thing that where people are asking me on is the unemployment rates. And they're like, hey, a lot of what you're saying makes sense, but what about unemployment? And this is where I want to go in and be as respectful as possible, because I understand that these are very hard times for some people. But overall, what's scheduled to take place is they did a big survey with a lot of CEOs, and a lot of them were projecting, hey, once this is done and once we have a good grip on it, we think that we can put in most of our employees back and have them up and running within about 3 months is the adjustment period that they felt like they would need there. And again, unemployment rates have dipped very strongly, but I think we are going to see a sharp return there. But a lot of the places that have been strongly affected by it are the folks that are in retail, the folks that are doing restaurants, the folks that are just a public gathering of folks. So where those are taking place, they're taking a very big hit, right? Tourism is taking a very big hit. And then the big question, and this is where, again, we're talking about speculation, is although these guys are interpreting and saying that these things are going to take place and it's going to be a rapid recovery, one of the very important things to note is a psychology thing. So a big psychological question is, even though the country will be reopened, businesses will be reopened, a big question on a lot of people's mind, and again, I don't know if I know the answer to this, is psychologically, how long is it going to take for people to go out and reintegrate themselves? How long is it going to take for them to say, hey, I've been cooped up here, I'm ready to go out and I'm ready to watch the soccer game, I'm ready to watch the baseball game, I'm ready to go out and go hang out at the restaurants, I'm ready to go out and do big events, I'm ready to go to weddings again, right? For all those things that are taking place, the big question is, how long is it going to take the society as a whole to come back and want to reintegrate? And that's a big question. My projection, and honestly, I could be wrong, I feel like a lot of people, once the government says, hey, go out and you guys are good to do that, we're recommending that, you social distance, but you go out and you participate in society. I think that a lot of people are going to go out, and I know I know a lot of folks that I know are going to be very anxious to go out and reintegrate, and they've been doing it more than anything out of respect for elderly folks, out of respect for folks with pre-existing conditions, and they haven't wanted to be the ones that were spreading it. But once they say, hey, go out and reintegrate, in terms of what they're doing for themselves, they say, hey, if it's safe from other people, then I'm happy to go out and re-expose myself, because my biggest concern was the other people. So that's a big psychology question. I'm not sure exactly how it'll play out, and that's one of the things that'll determine how fast we go right back into it. But as we look at other graphs are telling us that we're going to see normal appreciation take place. Instead of the 7% we were anticipating, they're anticipating we're going to be closer to about 3%. So in terms of appreciation, we're anticipating that instead of 7% like Zillow was predicting, what folks are looking at now is closer to 3% appreciation, which is still very healthy, right? If you have a $300,000 home, you bought it January of this year, by that same standard, by that 3%, it'll be worth $309,000, and you just made $9,000 in equity like that in 1 year. And that's just normal markets, and that's how things are playing out, which is a big reason, again, why I like real estate, is because you can leverage, and you can leverage in a very healthy way if you structure it correctly. Now, again, I'm going to go into big macro here. These are my opinions. I could be wrong. I could be right. Only time will tell, and we'll see how well this video ages. But essentially, here's what I think is going to happen, long-term macro. The things that I am concerned about, we've talked about a lot of things where I'm not concerned about them and why I think we are going to see a nice sharp recovery. But the big things that I am concerned about is just what happened with the $2 trillion that we just kind of pulled out of thin air. That is something that's worrisome to me. $20+ trillion in debt. That is, again, a little concerning to me. And then how is that going to affect us in the long-term scheme of things? Honestly, I hate to be a negative Nancy or negative Nelly or whoever in terms of, hey, that's all going to take care of itself. I think we're past that just taking care of itself, and I think we're going to see a point where it can play out really one of three ways. I can go in a little deeper into those one of three ways, but I want to shorten this video. And the way I think it's going to play out is within the next perhaps 7 to 12 years, maybe a little longer, maybe a little shorter, we're going to start seeing minimum wage rise. There's a big push for minimum wage to be $15 an hour. Right now, it's about $7.25. So if that takes place, the minimum wage is going to double, right? And if that takes place, and we're saying if, and we're speculating here at the end of this video, but if that takes place and minimum wage doubles, the people who are going to be really affected by that, honestly, are the folks who have money in their savings account. It's going to be tough because their money is essentially worth half of what it was. There's going to be a weird transition period from when, people are like, oh, hey, now we have all this money, to, hey, businesses are now going to start charging more because they have to pay more, and then just basic supply and demand to keep everything running. We're going to start seeing that money inflate. But if that money's inflated, even if the government charges the same amount in taxes, then they can pay off the debt quicker. And right, that's the essential idea behind it. I tend to agree with that. I think that's how it'll play out. And the big reason that I'm talking about this and why I'm interested in it, right, is because it has to do with real estate. What does that mean for folks in real estate? If you have a fixed mortgage, your mortgage isn't going to go up regardless of whether or not we have inflation. And that stays the same, right? Rents are going to go up. New house prices are going to go up because rents are going up, and then naturally they'll push themselves up. And so that'll be, in my opinion, we're going to see an insane amount of equity take place, and it'll be a good time to leverage and have a couple more properties and ride that wave. I honestly think that's what's going to take place for the folks who are landlords. It'll be a good time. Your homes will go up in value. I think they'll stay pretty close to the level of inflation that takes place. We're going to see them follow suit. And again, if that takes place, and I'm kind of speculating at this point, but I think it's a very likely scenario, then if my house was worth $300,000 and now it's worth $400,000 and $500,000 and $600,000 very rapidly, then if I only put even 20% to buy that house, I put in $60,000, and now that $60,000 is worth $360,000 in terms of my portion of the equity in that property. And that's where inflation actually plays out really well if you own real estate. If you don't own real estate, the stocks are probably going to get hit pretty hard starting it out, because the companies now have to pay their employees a heck of a lot more that they had budgeted for, right? Eventually it'll even itself out, and the businesses will charge more for their products, and they'll pay their employees a little bit more. And then that'll kind of even itself out. Again, the money in the bank drops in value significantly if this takes place. But real estate is one that actually is set up to ride the wave super well if something like that takes place. Again, my concern with coronavirus, and I'm not saying coronavirus is the only factor that's been going into this, we've had an unbalanced budget for far too long, and we've continued to have that debt escalate. And ultimately, that's what I think will take place in the long term of the long scheme going on. Again, who knows on that? That one's kind of my speculation. Over the long period, again, the next 3 to 5 years, I think real estate will do well. I think we'll see average appreciation and homes will continue to go up in value. Again, to resume what I've said here, right now, short term, before coronavirus, folks were anticipating a strong economy, housing going super well. During, it slowed down a little bit, but prices still are pretty high. But the nice thing is you're competing against a lot less people to get those offers. So if you're looking now, my suggestion would be to move at it very quickly, because a big thing I think will take place, and I should have mentioned this earlier in the video, but a big thing that I think will take place is all the buyers who've been waiting right now in spring because of what was going on with coronavirus, which is historically one of our busiest seasons, and summer, which both of those are our busiest seasons in real estate. Both of those groups will come out to the market at the same time, and I think we're going to have a market just be bombarded. There's going to be a lot more buyers out there. There's going to be multiple offer situations taking place for just average homes all of the time. And it's going to be very important to know who you're working with and making sure that you actually get those offers accepted, and you don't fall into just the, hey, the only way to get it accepted is if we're the highest offer, and then over leveraging yourself and setting yourself up in a bad situation. I think some of that will take place, and it's important, if you are waiting, to make sure you structure yourself and you're smart about the way you set everything up. And if you can move on something now, you want to move on something, my recommendation would be to do it now before you have to start competing against 9, 10, 12 other offers for any house that you want. I honestly think that that's the path we're going to see take place, especially if we see a rapid V recovery like Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and all those folks are projecting. So again, a little bit on the short term of what I see taking place there. But to resume it all, I think now is a good time to buy real estate. I think during coronavirus, after coronavirus, real estate tends to be a good place. And especially if we see what I'm projecting on the long-term plan, I think folks who buy real estate right now, especially in Utah, are going to be thinking themselves 20 years down the line and saying, hey, that was a really good decision for myself and my family. And their only regret is going to be, I should have bought more. But again, only time will tell. I'm excited to see how this video ages when I'm in my 40s and I have a long beard. We'll see how all of those things play out. But thanks for watching, and I hope this has been beneficial for you.